Well, hi, Mike. It's so nice to see you in good health.
Well, it's good to see you, Ilse Kong.
Yes, so nice to see you again. Since our time is rather limited, let's immediately get on the first subject of our conversation. And that is the US presidential election and its expected impacts, especially on international relations and the global order. The US, under the leadership of Donald Trump, during the last 4 years, rejected multilateralism and abandoned the multilateral commitments and the multilateral institutions. Instead, it chose unilateralism with the slogan of America First. Consequently, the international relations became more confrontational, less cooperative, and the rules-based multilateral system and the liberal global economic order have been eroded. Although the final election outcome is not yet determined, Joe Biden seems to be the likely winner after all. So assuming that, the question is whether or not the US, under his leadership, undo such legacies of Donald Trump. I'm sure our audience will be very much delighted and is to share your enlightened views.
Good. Well, these are interesting and important questions. So let me try to be fairly succinct. I think there's fairly general agreement that if the Biden candidacy turns into a Biden presidency, that there'll be at least a fairly significant reversal of the policies you mentioned in the international arena. So I would expect the United States to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. I would expect a reversal of the decision to withdraw from the WTO. And in general, the Biden administration is going to have to operate in a complex, domestic and international environment the same way everybody else does. So it won't be, I don't want to leave the impression that we're going to go back to, the sort of what I'll call the old normal, right? But in part because the old normal isn't going to work. We're going to have to reform some of these institutions. We're going to have to rebuild in a more pragmatic way the sort of international trading and investment order, because there are new factors, the rise of Asia, different value systems and governance systems, digital technologies are a complex element in the mix. But that said, the President of the United States does have significant power to operate autonomously relative to the Congress in international relations especially. And so I would expect that the United States would move fairly rapidly in the direction of much more active participation with its trading partners and other important processes in the global. I'm pretty sure that would be on the agenda. Yeah. Having said that, Ilse Kong, I'll just add one other thing. It's clear the United States is badly divided, and the Biden administration is going to have to deal with, polarization, political and social. The Democratic Party itself is a very wide spectrum of views on how to govern, the role of government, and so on. So, there's a pretty big sort of domestic, political, social, and economic agenda, not to mention the pandemic. So I don't think your listeners and viewers should get the impression that the entire focus of the Biden administration will be on international relations. It's far from it. But I think it's a positive step.
I fully agree with you. However, even under the Biden presidency, the current conflict between China and US will be pretty much continued. if you see that conflict originate from inevitable hegemonic competition, and it will be continued and may even become steeper.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you. So on the American side, first of all, it's a more complicated environment for the United States, for China, for Korea, for everybody. And China is rising, has aspirations, is already actually a significant global power, a major force in Asia. And there is a rivalry between the United States and China, at least for a period of time. I think at some point China will be the dominant power, actually. But in the meantime, there'll be tensions. And on the American side, the problems with China, if I can put it that way, for perceived problems with China, are shared right across the political spectrum. So, at least from the American side, while there'll be, I would imagine, a less aggressive approach to dealing with China, and probably a little bit more attention to try to find areas in which there's real benefits, mutual benefits to cooperating, as in health and climate change. The tensions will be there, and they probably will get steeper. I mean, we've got demonstrable examples of problems in the digital technology area, in part because digital technologies are an element of national security, and that's not an economic agenda at all.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's turn to COVID-19 pandemic crisis. The history teaches us that major global crises always bring historically significant consequences. Let's consider what would be major consequences of the current pandemic crisis, and perhaps we may draw some lessons, important lessons from the crisis. Of course, we currently experience short-term economic consequences. We have unprecedented economic downturns, and the people suffering. The question in this regard is whether or not recovery, if it comes soon at all, it will be a protracted one, or so-called V-shaped recovery is possible at all. How do you see it?
I think there's fairly general agreement that this pandemic economy, A, has caused a lot of damage, and B, has accelerated and amplified a number of trends. One of them is digital, right? I mean, digital, technologies have proved to be an important element of resilience, and lots of people are saying, we've seen 5 years of adoption in normal times occur in 2 months. I mean, this isn't, a mild acceleration, it's a huge acceleration. And I think that, the trend, one of the most important global trends was the shift of the center of gravity of the global economy to Asia. Asia has handled the pandemic better than the rest of the world. They're the closest things to V-shaped recoveries are actually occurring in Asian countries. And so I think that will be another example of accelerating the shift of economic power and influence and sheer size toward Asia, and that's not a bad thing. But it was underway before. On the actual recoveries, I mean, there's always the possibility that we'll have a therapeutic or a vaccine that's so effective and widely distributed that sometime next year we start to see recovery patterns that are more like V-shaped ones. But right now, the patterns are all pretty clear and similar, which is, you have a big drop, you have a trough, basically, while you try to get the virus under control. And then you get a recovery that starts to look fairly rapid because some sectors come back faster than others. And then you start to get this slowdown because there's some sectors that just really can't recover in the presence of a fairly deadly virus. Things like hospitality, hotels, food, restaurants, flying, sporting events. There's all kinds of things that, it doesn't matter if you prohibit these activities or allow them to happen, because a subset of the population will say, well, I'm risk averse or I'm vulnerable, I'm not going to do them. So I think the proposition is that one way or another, you won't see full recovery until the virus is under control. And we're in the place in the world where that's closest to the truth is certainly in Korea, Taiwan, economy, China, mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore. So that's how it looks to me. I think we're in for a pretty tough. Bottom line is, I don't think, Ilse-Kong, we're going to have a widely distributed, vaccine in the next few months. So I'm thinking that 2021 is going to be a pretty tough year globally. But especially outside of Asia, and after that, things will probably start to look better.
Okay. From a little bit longer perspective, would it be reasonable to say that we will see the world less globalized, and more digitized, and less equal in terms of income distribution and in terms of economic power distribution, in favor of technology-related individuals, firms, and industries? In any case, would it be reasonable to say this?
I think largely yes. I mean, the pandemic, so one of the trends that we referred to before was rising income and wealth inequality and other things that are related to that. And the pandemic economy has made that worse, right? Both domestically and internationally. So domestically, the people who have been hardest hit in most of our countries are ones in the lower end of, the bottom half of the income spectrum. The people who are working from home, aren't unemployed. They're not on unemployment benefits or, extended work programs, created by the government. And then you have the people who are vulnerable because they're in the essential sectors. And some of those folks are also in the lower income side. I mean, the way I describe it, Ilse-Kong, at least in the American context, is there was a study done at the University of Chicago that asked the question, what fraction of jobs in America could be done from home? And they came up with a number, a third. And then they looked at it by geography and sector, and there were significant differences, but the sectoral ones are really striking. So in technology, 90% of the jobs could be done from home. In finance, it was in the 80s. In hospitality, it was 4%, right? So the other 96%, and those are the sectors that we had to shut down. So the other, those that, and that's 17 million people in terms of American employment, right? So, and it just cements the proposition. And internationally, the most vulnerable countries are the ones that don't have, adequate medical capacity and structures, limited fiscal capacity, have to borrow in a foreign hard currency, lower income developing countries, not the high middle income countries, not the developed countries. They're highly vulnerable and probably are going to end up in a worse condition as a result of that. But on the digital technology side, I think it's a little more subtle. Most of the talk and writing, at least in the West, about digital technologies runs in the direction of are there enough jobs? Are people going to be making transitions to jobs that work? Can we protect our data? Is it secure? Is it private? Do these mega platforms have too much monopoly power, and so on and on it goes. But the digital technologies are being used in a number of Asian countries, including China, to create really startlingly inclusive growth patterns, both on the e-commerce and the fintech side. So I think that digital technology deployed properly and with responsible regulation and management of things like data is really crucial. It could be, a highly positive force in the global economy in lots of different ways. So I think the picture that's been painted about digital technology is it's not wrong. It's just a little biased in the negative direction, at least where I live at the moment.
Now, our time is running out. Through 2007 and 8 financial crisis, the world learned again that the global problems demand global solutions, which require a closer and stronger international cooperation.
Yep.
I suppose this pandemic, again, is really another significant wake-up call for the global leaders to realize the importance of international cooperation, and this international cooperation is most urgently needed global public good.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything you said. So, you know, this is a lesson. It's not just climate change. You know, we got to live inside planetary boundaries. We have to share technologies and innovative solutions. You know, in some dimensions, we're doing pretty well. I mean, every time I decide I'm going to be pessimistic, I think of the dramatic drop in the cost of solar energy and electricity, and think, you know, maybe there really is a chance of dealing with this problem with enough commitment and leadership. But one thing I think is pretty clear. You know, we tend to describe these events that come out of the blue, like the great financial crisis or this pandemic, and say, well, you know, this doesn't happen very often. People make statements like once in 100 years. Well, if you think about it, we're having once in 100 years, you know, shocks, huge shocks about every decade. And so I think, you know, we got to get used to the fact and think in terms of resilience, in preparedness, and keeping our balance sheets in shape so that, you know, we can do this. For investors, I think, you know, the right thing to do is anticipate that this kind of thing is going to occur, and try to position, you know, investments and portfolios in such a way that they're as shock resistant as possible. But you know, there's no question that in order to deal with the challenges that we face effectively, a international cooperation with all hands on deck, I mean, is a way I would say it, is an absolute, you know, minimum kind of requirement to get it done. And I'm like you, I'm hopeful that a Biden administration, you know, with or without a lot of domestic support, will move the United States back in that direction. So we're not leading the effort. I don't think, you know, the United States is in a position to lead anything anymore, but we're at least an active participant, constructive, active participant, and a source of, you know, innovation and solutions when we can be.
Yeah, I appreciate very much for your sharing your valuable views. Okay, take care of yourself, and
you too. Take care.